In this video, I'm going to tell you why there are so many migrants in the UK and why there is now a crisis, and that the reason for that crisis is the fault of the British government, not the migrants. If these rioters in Britain knew the true history of Africa and their relationship with us, they'd realize they should be thanking Nigerians, Indians, Pakistanis, Kenyans, Ghanaians, Rwandans, and all the people holding up their economy instead of attacking them. Pay attention. The British Empire didn't just colonize the peoples of Africa and India. It systematically stripped them of their wealth, a lot of it, more than you can possibly calculate. In India, the British extracted resources worth an estimated $45 trillion in today's value. This is an underestimate, but yes, I said trillion with a T, not a B or an M. This is the minimum sum the UK owes India in reparations if India really wants to be paid back what was stolen from them. This caused India great suffering with poverty and famine. Famously, Winston Churchill, while extracting resources from India, allowed over 3 million Indians to die of hunger during the 1943 famine, so that he could direct food to the British military and other areas he deemed more important. Churchill blamed the famine on the Indians themselves, even though his own British officials in India begged him to send aid. In spite of this, Indians still contributed to rebuilding the UK after the war. Then you can take Ghana, forced into economic dependence on cocoa, only to be plunged into crisis when the global prices dropped. I made an entire video on the Ghana Ivory Coast cocoa wars that you should watch right now on my channel. All these countries were left impoverished and unstable and caused the descendants of those people to look for better lives and opportunities elsewhere. So they went west to places like the UK. But let's be clear, this migration isn't random. It's a direct result of the economic chaos the British government left behind in those former colonies, and the actual initiatives the UK government implemented to invite peoples from their former colonies to rebuild their broken economies in the West after the grueling impact of World War II. You see, the British didn't just steal resources from Africa and India, they carved up nations. Nigeria isn't a real country, but a corporation created for economic gain by the British Empire. You can watch my video Origin of Nigeria to understand exactly how this was done. The divisions the British government created in Nigeria and all across their African colonies is the direct reason for the instability that has led to migration and the phenomenon known as Japa, which means to flee in Yoruba. The brain drain of many countries in Africa and also of India, where our best intellects leave our countries for the UK, isn't our gain. It's theirs. Then there's the role of British multinational companies like Shell, the oil companies, where environmental degradation and human rights abuses have pushed people out of their homes, like the Delta region, which has been decimated by the damage of these oil corporations. The irony is these Africans then migrate to the UK, a country that is actually profiting from their suffering that caused them to migrate. Indians and African migrants contribute immensely to the UK economy, with Indian professionals making up 74% of Tier 2 visas and contributing over £10 billion annually in taxes, while African migrants add around £28 billion through their skilled work and entrepreneurship, including 32,000 Indian doctors and over 23,000 African healthcare workers in the NHS. Their businesses generate billions. These migrants generate billions in revenue to the United Kingdom, and their cultural impact is immense, such as the £5 billion Indian cuisine industry, along with their roles in education, where Indian and African students contribute over £1.3 billion in tuition fees, which strengthens trade relations valued at over £24 billion annually with India and growing ties with Africa. This makes them indispensable to the UK's prosperity. This isn't even accounting for corner shops, news agents, and so forth run by migrants all through the country. If these people leave the United Kingdom, the entire British economy would collapse in 24 hours. Some might say, well, that is the problem. We should have never relied on migrants in the first place. These people are in denial. Major delusion. A lot of migrants are doing jobs white Britons don't want to do, and most definitely not for the low wages migrants are willing to do those jobs for. You want to clean toilets for £5 £5 an hour, clean houses for £10 an hour, work in a kitchen for 16 hours a day, sweep roads through the night in the winter for shady business owners that pay you half of what they should? Do you want to really do any of those jobs? No. The answer is definitely no. So exactly whose jobs are they taking? That's the question you've got to really ask. And let's not forget debt and austerity. You see, countries like Jamaica and Zambia have been shackled with debt after independence or alleged independence from the UK. The UK-backed IMF imposes crippling austerity measures on these countries, where these countries are forced to make budgetary cutbacks in exchange for those loans. Cutbacks that destroy their own economic development. These policies plunged people into poverty, driving them to seek opportunities in countries like the UK. You see how the vicious cycle works. And we have to go back to World War II. Migrants literally rebuilt the UK economy after they lost half their male workforce in World War II. Pakistanis, for instance, were recruited to help rebuild post-war Britain. They were welcomed with open arms back then, but face hostility now despite their long history of contribution to the United Kingdom. And what about the Windrush generation? Caribbean migrants were also invited to Britain after World War II to help rebuild the economy. But instead of gratitude, Jamaicans, Caribbeans faced systemic racism and the horrific Windrush scandal, where they were wrongfully detained and deported. These were people who were invited to go to the UK to rebuild, and after they did that, that is how they were treated. A lot of the Jamaicans and Caribbeans in the UK right now are descendants, direct descendants of the people who helped rebuild the country in a war that wasn't even fought for them. If it wasn't for migrants from the Caribbean, India, Pakistan, Nigeria, the UK economy would have never recovered from World War II. Have you been to hospitals in the UK lately? Their doctors are Indian, nurses are Africans, Filipinos, saving lives, looking after the elderly that they don't want to look after. Migrants aren't just contributors, they're essential to the UK economy. So why are the riots happening? Why are so many white Britons scapegoating migrants for their problems, using the attack in Southport as an excuse and a catalyst for their hatred and xenophobia? These rioters haven't had anything to say about the Ukrainian migrants, who are literally the definition of asylum seekers. Because, as many reporters have highlighted, when the war in Ukraine and Russia broke out, they look just like us, with blonde hair and blue eyes. That isn't the same for the Syrians, for the Africans, for the Pakistanis, for the Indians, for everybody else coming from all over the world. The Ukrainians have been treated very, very differently.
It's very emotional for me because I see European people with blue eyes and blonde hair being killed, children being killed every day with Putin's missiles.
So I ask you again, why are these riots happening? Why is it so easy for so many white Britons to scapegoat these minorities as the reason for their problems? It's because we aren't taught the truth about Africa, because we're not taught true history. The British education system glosses over the brutal realities of colonialism and slavery. If white people in the UK, France, and the US were actually taught their country's real history, they'd see migrants not as a threat, but as the very people they owe everything. British people shouldn't be attacking migrants. They should be thanking them. Indians are one of the biggest contributors to the daily operation of the United Kingdom at every level imaginable, yet the average Briton doesn't realize it. Even curry is the national dish of the UK. And don't let me get started on the immense Arab contribution to the UK. You can watch my video on the hypocrisy of the West and the Qatar World Cup to get an idea about that. Seriously, British writers, listen to me. You go after the Muslims too hard, and Qatar and Saudi Arabia might just decide to switch your lights off. Migrants are in the UK because of history, a history British people need to face, understand, and respect. The clothes, cars, food, and baseball bats you're using to riot were all made possible by the countries of the people you are rioting against. If you believe learning the true history of Africa is important, sign up on the link in my bio to support my True History of Africa Challenge, where I'm creating books, ebooks, and audiobooks chronicling the history of every African nation from prehistoric times to the present day.